Okay, well, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the coffee break. I know we had quite a lively debate before the coffee break, and I'm sure we're going to have an interesting debate today. I'm very pleased to have you, Kristalina, the CEO of the World Bank. You're not a stranger to Austria, because I remember the first time that we met was at the Aalbach Forum in August 2016. Aalbach Forum, you may not know much about it. Just think of it as Davos without the snow and much cheaper, yeah? And more interesting, perhaps. Yes? So it really has been a pleasure to have you here. I think over the last 3 years or 4, you've really led the bank through a difficult period. Lots of adjustment at the political level, lots of adjustment on the economic level, yeah? And I'm sure you're now looking at the next challenges that are coming up. I think a lot of those challenges are going to actually center around the whole question of how do we use new technologies? How do we minimize the risks and maximize the benefits of new technology? What can they do, in fact, to transform the way that governments interact with citizens, yes? Both on the expenditure side and on the tax side? And how do we do that in ways that don't undermine social protection? I mean, the whole issue of robots, yes? Robots sound great, but what if they replace people? Where do those people go, yeah? So there's a whole set of issues out there that I think are going to be on your agenda for quite a bit of time. The audience you have here, it's a mix. There are tax people, there are technological people, and then there's some normal people as well, yes? So it's a nice mix here. This digital economy tax network that we have tries to bring together. We have about a network of 400 people now. Bringing in 8 research institutes, the Inter-American Development Bank, the Commonwealth Association of Tax, the CIAT, a whole bunch of people here. And I hope we're going to get the bank, and I hope we're going to get the WCO in as well. We don't speak enough about that. So I'm not going to say anything more. I think we're all looking forward very much to listening to your presentation. And I understand you're okay to take a few questions afterwards?
Of course.
Excellent. So maybe up at the platform, please.
Good afternoon. Let me see how powerful the audience is. How do you feel today? Good? Excellent. Well,
They're having a hard day talking about tax.
I am coming then to the right audience because I want to share with you some thoughts around how we at the bank think of technology development and tax, and really place some questions that we have to work together on. There are no obvious and clear answers. Since you asked whether the World Bank would be interested to work with this group, the answer is automatically and very clearly yes. And let me start from that premise, why it is so important for the bank to engage on this topic. Only a couple of days ago, I chaired a bank board meeting on the question of domestic resource mobilization and illicit financial flows. It was one of the most intensely engaging board meetings in quite some time, because all of our board members are genuinely very keenly interested in understanding how developing countries can raise the revenues for the core investments in their future. I feel like I'm on a spaceship here.
I think there are some people in Mars that want to hear what you're saying. Yes? This building has
hi, people in Mars. So while the Martians are getting a good view of our room, and maybe to lighten the beginning, here we go. Anybody here driving a Tesla? Tesla? Okay, well, I would admit that as a owner of Tesla, I belong to this cult that is about technologies change the way we live. Not only the way we drive, but the whole experience you have. And it is for transport, it is for jobs, it is for studying. I am in that spirit of full disclosure of driving a Tesla, recently being quite fascinated by something that Elon Musk, who is a controversial figure, but nonetheless says things that are quite interesting. And in this particular case, what he said was, I think there is a pretty good chance we'll end up with a universal basic income or something like that due to automation. And I'm not sure what else one would do. I think that's what would happen. People have time to do other things and more complex things, more interesting things, and certainly would have more leisure time. Well, this is the technological optimist speaking. And of course, we know that there are many who are extremely worried about automation creating not leisure time, but massive unemployment, and creating anxieties in societies on a scale that has not been seen before. From where we sit at the World Bank, we completely embrace that notion that the world of work is changing very rapidly and quite dramatically. Let me start from one example from right here, from Europe. Over the last 10 years, in Europe, manual routine jobs have been steadily disappearing. Some 16% of these jobs are gone. And at the same time, non-routine creative jobs have been coming up with pretty much the same speed. We have seen 15% jobs created in Europe as a result of technological advancements. And you would say, so what is the problem? You know, 15, 16% gone, 15% new jobs, the math works. Well, the problem is that the people who lost their jobs are not the people who have the skills to be moving into the new jobs. And we see the impact of this not just in the way of life, in the social fabric, we see it in politics in Europe. Same applies to the United States, same applies everywhere. So we have to recognize that preparing people to work alongside new technologies is an absolutely paramount priority challenge for policymakers everywhere. We have recently done our World Development Report on the future of work, and the core messages of this report are two. One, robust investment in people, in human capital, is what is going to make it or break it for nations in the developing world. And two, in this fast-changing environment of work, universal social protection system is a must. There has to be a social compact between governments and citizens that reflects this changing nature of work. When we calculated the cost of moving towards a massive investment in human capital and in universal social protection system, we concluded that it would be somewhere between 6 to 8% of GDP on average. Well, for this to be funded, countries need a robust revenue-raising system. And of course, it is not just tax, but tax plays a very big part of it. Unfortunately, in many developing countries today, the level of tax collection is falling short of the notional 15% of GDP that we think is critically necessary to provide for the key social expenditures of governments. In the board meeting I referred to, we looked at the number of countries where this level of tax is somewhere around 12, 13, 14%. So we have on one side a critical need to generate revenues at a sizable level to invest in the economies of tomorrow. But then the paradox is that moving to a digital economy, unless there is dramatic upgrade of tax systems, actually brings down the level of tax revenues. Why? Because of three reasons. The first reason is that with the digital economy, informality goes up. People have easier time to start businesses, move to jobs, and what is in many developing countries today a big share of the economy that is informal and not so easily traced may actually grow. Secondly, because for governments to collect taxes from digital businesses, as you have been discussing, I understand today, is not so straightforward. It should be that technology makes it easier, but not necessarily does, and I'll come back to that point in a minute. And the third reason why it is more difficult is because where the company or the service originates and where the consumer, the user of service, resides, two different locations, and we are not yet very good in dealing with this problem. So what are the main challenges that the future of work presents to taxation? The first challenge is that in many developing countries, the digital economy is patchy. In other words, to have a uniform transition to taxation based on use of automation, digitalizing taxation means that people actually have to belong to a digital economy. Take Sub-Saharan Africa. Only 22% of people in Sub-Saharan Africa today are connected to the internet. Even if we were to imagine a world in which we wake up and 100% of government services, including taxation, are digitalized, and we have all the data, the users are not there. So the first big issue for developing countries is to catch up with the transition to a digital economy. For Africa, we have a dream. How many of you are familiar with Kennedy's speech, Moonshot? Remember it? Kennedy, yes? Well, Kennedy saying, we are going to land on the moon. And at that time, many people saying, cannot be done, will not be done, forget it. 1969, the first human to step on the moon was the reflection of Moonshot. So what we are working with Africa today is on what we call Digital Moonshot Africa. And it is to place this big dream that by 2030, every African citizen, business, government will be part of the digital economy. Everybody would be connected to the internet. Because if we are to be discussing digitalization and tax, the prerequisite is the taxable subjects, individual or businesses, to be part of the digital economy. So for the digitalization to happen on a scale that makes it possible to shift more aggressively into use of technology in taxation, there are 4 components, and I'm sorry, life is not simple. We have to have all 4 of them to get to a good place. The first one, of course, is the obvious, digital infrastructure. Luckily, in the case of Africa, the continent on its shores is already connected quite well. There are enough cables that make the African continent part of the global digital space. But when you move from the shores inward, the story is very different. Rural Africa is not connected at all. And the fact that there are very different government standards, aspirations, make it also very difficult to penetrate further. So we are working with the African Union, with the African Development Bank, tomorrow here at the summit that Austria is hosting on that determination to bring connectivity inland in Africa. And there are some really very cool things. I was told that there are people here that are technology experts. Who are from technology, from business? Okay, so you will forgive me, I'm not one of you. But when that was presented to me, for example, the fact that analog TV is providing space possibly to be used for connectivity to the internet is something I wasn't aware. It's called white space, and that white space can very rapidly expand access to the internet, as could balloons and satellites and all kinds of new inventions. But that determination that the infrastructure for digital economy in Africa has to be there is one that we are absolutely embracing, and the price tag, not to be quoted because we still have work to do, but the price tag is not an impossibility. My colleagues are saying it is about $15 billion. Just to give you a comparison, over 3 years we invest, with the World Bank only, we invest about $45 billion in Africa. The second issue is to have people that are trained. And this is not trivial, because we are talking about universal digital literacy in a continent where there are plenty of people that are today illiterate, and even in numerical cannot really use numbers easily. But we also have a continent that managed to jump to 900 million cell phone subscribers, making it one of the fast-growing spaces on the planet for cell phone services. So we are hoping to work on simple ways in which people can connect to the digital economy. And we see there two really critical steps. One is digital ID, the ability to say me is me in a digital manner. And the second one is to have the government to put as much as possible its services to people on a digital platform, e-pay, moving from cash to digital payments on a massive scale. It has been done in India on a very massive scale. We have seen it. And then the question is, if it is done in India, why not in Africa? The third prerequisite is e-trade. And that is something that we are seeing patchily, but we are seeing it in Africa happening quite massively. We have seen in a very impressive way, for example, Kenya moving to internet, to e-trade. Well, question is how we can create conditions across the continent for e-trade, for e-business to pick up. And that takes me to my fourth and most important part. For the continent to have standards that are universal for all countries. If we were to succeed, and I'm giving the example of Africa only because this is the most dramatic way we need to do a big pickup. If we were to succeed to move to a digital economy, then wouldn't it be logical that digital economy goes hand in hand with digital what? With digital taxation. And here comes the next challenge to overcome. And it sounds on face value, it sounds actually very, very simple and very straightforward. So you have a digital economy, you have digital taxation, digital tools that collect taxes more accurately. In the VAT space, you discussed that in the previous session, it could overcome many obstacles that we face today. We can have artificial intelligence to calculate tax liabilities and avoid double taxation. We can have the gig economy captured through blockchain, so we can have the fast-moving, informal, in a way, part, or the sharing economy part, moving into the tax space. But I'm sure you have discussed in the previous session what is the but. And in developing countries, the but is even more complicated than in the OECD world. First part of the but is that we need really very high quality data. Companies have lots of data, but that data is not necessarily organized in the way that can easily be plucked from. In the world of developing countries, the coexistence of digital data and data that is manually entered is massive. In some countries, it is actually still the manually entered data that dominates. So to get to that point when we have digital economy, high quality data to move to digital taxation system, this is kind of a long way to go. So are there examples that this long way can be shortened? One very nice example is one that I understand you have been discussing, and it is the case of Rwanda. Rwanda is a country where the leadership has made a commitment by 2030 to be a middle-income country, and by 2050 to be a high-income country. And they understand that this can only be done by migrating into the digital world as quickly as possible. Another example is right here in Estonia. Anybody from Estonia in the audience?
Half the audience, and we even have a Kenyan as well.
Well, you probably experience this on a daily basis, but it is very interesting to see how the Estonian government gets into collaboration with tech companies to move them into paying taxes in a fair way. The latest being with Airburn. That kind of governments that lead the way for others to see and follow is what is actually the most encouraging for us in the development space. Well, is it something that we are comfortable, that is a kind of a easy and straightforward fix? And the answer is no. When I was invited to come and meet with you, actually my excitement is not so much because I can share with you how we think about moving countries into the digital economy and then moving them towards a digital taxation. It is mostly because I can pose to very smart people who work on this topic questions we are wrestling with, and then see how in this wrestling together we may be coming up with answers or a pathway to answers. So here are the questions we are wrestling with. The first question is, if we were to move towards digital economy, the number one question in taxation ought to be how to benefit by taxing businesses that are already there. In other words, the leading digital companies. How can we make it so that they are contributors to make the investments in people and in digital infrastructure for this loop to be closed? Right now, the companies that are primarily mostly digital companies are not necessarily, to put it bluntly, the biggest contributors to the government purse. So let me go through the questions as we think of them, and then you may help me with other questions and certainly with answers. First question, whether digital platforms should pay taxes at all in countries where they do business, but they do not have a physical presence. So you do business in a country, you have customers in the country, but you're not driving on the roads, you're not drinking of the water, you're not living in the cities. Why should you be paying taxes? Or maybe they should be taxing in countries where they are customers, and this is the EU proposal that got miserably pushed back. What do we do about it? The second question, where should digital, let's say the first question is whether they should pay taxes if they're not physically present. The second question, where they should pay taxes. Under the current law, the companies are basically getting a free pass for the customers they serve, the territories their customers are. Should that continue, or we should be thinking of revising that? And of course, as I said, there are a number of proposals. The third question is, should we be waiting until there is multilateral or at least regional solution, the EU tax, or we should accept that countries are free to march with their own national initiatives in that regard? Slovakia in amending the permanent establishment definition so they can capture profits from digital companies. Hungary, digital advertising tax since 2014. UK, 2% tax. We were with the Chancellor recently, and he was saying, come, with or without the EU tax. And not to state the obvious, but with or without the EU period. But with or without EU tax, we are going to have a 2% tax. Is that the right way to go? Spain and Italy announced, also from a revenue raising standpoint, their determination in 2019, this is next year, to have taxes. And if we go in this way, if we are in agreement, what should developing countries do? Should they rush to get their own national frameworks in place? Should they do it collectively so they have more negotiating power? Should that be part of our mandate, the World Bank, to work with countries and regions to do more about that? And last but not least, what about the robots? Should we tax them? This is, as you know, Bill Gates' proposal. Tax the damn robot, everything would find in place. But if we were to go in this direction, how do we define what is a robot? What is the unintended consequence on productivity and automation? And is this something that actually really would contribute to retaining human employment? Is that likely to be the case? So we have a, just to sum it up, in the developing world, we are very, very anxious to work out through these issues. Just to sum it, we are faced with this paradox that the future of work depends on people getting from very early age, from the day babies are born, an investment in skills that are different from what used to be necessary to get a job. That costs money. And we have the need to guarantee that when people enter and exit the work space, they would not fall hard because of lack of good system of social protection. We need some form of universality in social protection. And that also costs money. And at the same time, technology for now is helping more tax avoidance than an increase in tax collection. So we stare in the face of a fiscal gap. There is no way to close this gap without solving the problems around taxing digital businesses, one side of the equation, and digitizing taxation, the other side of the equation. And the way to deal with this set of questions I have left you with is actually to use the type of crowdsourcing of solutions that a setting like this presents. Let me finish with the following. When I was starting my professional career back in Bulgaria in the 70s, I became a professor. Actually, universities are my favorite place since then. I became a professor, junior professor, actually assistant professor first. And I thought that I will work in the same university until I become a full professor and then retire at the age of 55. Here I am standing in front of you. I'm not going to say by how much, but I'm more than 55. I have changed 5 careers. I have changed 5 times. 5 times I changed continents. And I still have the appetite to work. This, what has been my experience, is going to be faster and would impact massively more people. And for that future, the tax system we have today falls a tiny bit short. So since you are the tax experts, it is now my privilege to pass the buck to this audience. Make it work for the future. Thank you.
I only wish we had you as our opening speaker. Yes, we would have had a much more difficult day, yeah, with the questions you put. I can see you've not lost your professorial habits of putting difficult questions as well, yeah? So there we are. This is very unusual, in fact, when the speaker actually says, I've come with questions. I think you want some answers, yes? So let's say who you are, country, and it has to be a short question. I don't want, your family history, whether you have a dog or not, yeah? Just a short question.
Okay. Rifat Azam, Associate Professor of Law at IDC Herzliya. Thanks a lot for being with us. This is really a great opportunity. Thanks, Jeffrey, for the opportunity. I have been working on these excellent questions for more than 10 years. They are very hard, complex answers. But I would like to raise an idea, and maybe you could take it and move it forward as a World Bank. And the idea is companies are not paying enough taxes. Governments are losing substantial revenues as a result of digitalizations. How about the idea of cooperating and imposing a transaction-based tax, very low rates, automated system on worldwide basis on the digital economy to fund development in Africa, to fund digitalization of Africa, and the World Bank could lead such a project, and for the long run, also the companies would benefit from such a development. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. I would be interested to hear others from the audience, and if there is anybody from the business that you are proposing to tax, I would be very interested to hear from them as well. And I'm not saying this, I actually think that there are many businesses that are recognizing that it is in their long-term interest to have sustained revenues. Yes.
Hi, my name is Kristalina Georgieva. I'm a PhD researcher here at VEU. And my research project is a robot tax, so apparently I have I have an answer, not really an answer, but I can raise back another question to you with regard to the robot taxation. So you first mentioned in the beginning of your presentation that we will have to deal in the future with the loss of tax revenue, so in order to invest in human capital, we need to raise some revenue in order to prepare the future generation to to have the same opportunities in the labor markets. So from this perspective, if we deal with the robotax from the perspective of the loss of revenue, someone would say that this is not an ideal option because you could raise revenue in many other ways. Another justification that in my view is more strong is the mitigating the inequality. So inequality that already exists to a certain extent due to globalization, and it's going to be exacerbated because of digitalization and robotization in the future. I think it has more strong roots in order to say that, yes, there should be a sort of taxation towards this direction. Of course, the more challenging question is how we do it. And with regard also to whether robots may constitute a way of tax avoidance strategy, let's say, because if a business employs robots not only because it wants to increase productivity, etc., but because it's taxed less, then of course, yeah, it is a decision that it is in itself distortive because it affects the business behavior in this way. So from this perspective also, I think we could say, yes, there should be a tax also on robots. So I have these two points on that.
Should we take one more question?
Yes, absolutely. Yes,
that's gentleman. Oh, Kevin. I warned you that he worked with the Kenyan Revenue Authority, so you have to...
Excellent. Kenya is a very progressive minded country.
Thank you very much. And the question that I'm going to ask you also relates to Kenya. You mentioned in your first point that if you are to move towards a digital economy, then we have to see how we are going to benefit by taxing the large multinationals that allegedly have not been paying their fair share of taxes. But for me, some of these digital developments also raise unique opportunities for bringing the informal sector to the formal sector, because we have traceable ways, permanent ways of tracing transactions that happen in these sectors, so that the government can be able to know what kind of transactions they are doing, what kind of business they are doing. So, for example, M-Pesa in Kenya, previously many of the people are unbanked, many of the transactions were cash transactions, but with the onboarding to the M-Pesa platforms, you could actually see some economic activities taking place in the actual informal sector. So, what is the World Bank doing to help countries like Kenya make use of this technology to bring the informal sector to the formal sector and enhance taxation? That's a question for you. Secondly, you also mentioned the question of internet infrastructure in many of the countries in Africa is lacking, and you're partnering with African Union, African Development Bank to see how to deepen infrastructure. What is the role of private companies like Google? Are you also engaging with them in putting up the Google balloons that they're putting in some cities? Thank you very much.
So great points, great questions. To start with the transaction tax on the digital economy, broadly speaking, that there has to be some way in which digital companies contribute to the foundation for more inclusive digital economy. That premise is right. The question is who you tax, for what you tax, how you tax, and how you distribute what you collect. And that is a whole universe that is not yet even remotely being fully exploited. Transaction tax have their friends and I wouldn't say enemies, but say non-friends. This is an idea that has been circulating for a long time around. And I think to take your point, it is certainly an option worth reviewing, at least defining what are the questions to be answered for this to become a reality. And it actually goes into the broader question of, do we go for something that is at least regional, if not global, or we go country by country? And your question actually implies regional or global as the answer. I have a colleague here who is more competent than me technically on these details. Maybe she would like to add later on. On the robotax, thank you for telling us you work on that. We intend to have a debate around this question at the bank, so we would make sure that we have your email, we connect with you, and maybe you would tell us who else should be included. We recognize that in the end, if taxation is digitalized and automated, then a robot would be taxing the robots. So how we go about that, this is to be seen. They are, as I know, I'm sure you know, there are very difficult questions around what do you define to be a robot. I came yesterday on Austrian. The plane is 85% automated in how it flies, right? Is that a robot or not? So there are these issues, but that we have to define the regime of taxation in an era of automation and digital economy that is different from what we have today. This is absolutely correct. And we at the bank realized that for quite some time we were a little absent from these debates. This report, the changing nature of work, you can download it. It actually has been downloaded over 750,000 times. It is the one that kicks us in high gear to think about many aspects of public policy, including taxation, differently. Now, on the questions that you placed from Kenya, one, how we bring the informal sector in the formal economy. Well, actually, the spread of digital ID and M-Pesa, these are very good data foundations to capture the informality better. Every time when we move from cash to digital payments, and you build a good system to follow the money, the digital money, that is a way in which governments have a much better basis including to tax. And obviously, the question is how to do that so taxation doesn't turn into an obstacle to the spur of economic activities, and that for this reason there are tax holidays and rebates and all these other things, or simply delaying taxation on certain activities under a certain level to encourage these activities to take place. What we found is that just this simple move from cash to digital money is enormously beneficial for countries. I'll give you one example. I was in Zambia recently talking to a teacher, and this teacher still receives her salary in the capital to where she has to go in cash. She has to go in a working day, collect her payment in cash and go back. So kids in school lose 2 days of classes. Certainly this is a very dangerous way to carry your salary. Hugely inefficient. So after this conversation, I can tell you I went to my colleagues at the bank and I said, we have to go into digital payment, digital ID and digital payment much faster. We have about $900 million today invested in digital ID. We call it ID4D, ID for development. We are going to expand that. As part of this Moonshot Africa, we are going to move much, much faster. And it would help us to deal with many unintended consequences of lack of digital services, but it also would help us building the data foundation for more inclusive taxation. And if I can just add one more point here, it is absolutely paramount that when we do so, people can see the benefits of paying taxes. So if you don't walk on 2 legs, you collect, but then you invest in the well-being of people, the avoidance problem, people would figure it out with digital or not digital. They would figure out to go around it. And that is where the whole question of tax is not just about tax. Tax is about countries functioning better. Is so very, very, very central. I'm really glad to meet somebody from Kenya. I'm very impressed by the determination with which Kenya has moved forward in this digital space. And may I ask you a question? Are people paying more taxes in Kenya these days now that they're moving digital and in the... What is your impression? I'm sorry, this is my chance to get...
That's a very difficult question. The premise of the Kenya Revenue Authority, I don't speak for them because I'm on a sabbatical, is that we intend to use it as a form of encouraging people to come into the tax net. So as yet, there's not been a very hard clampdown on enforcement. So it's more of a data gathering phase, trying to move people into the tax space, know what kind of activities are going on, what kind of business they're doing on. Then we will go to the next phase where we'll now start analyzing this data and analyzing the transactions that underlie them to be able to start clamping on tax collection and tax enforcement. So I wouldn't say that we are collecting more or less, but one thing that moving to digital platforms has enabled us is to cut down on corruption, because the cash payments are their own means of finding their ways to other pockets that were not intended to be the beneficiaries. And since now these transactions are traceable, the route to the exchequer has been shortened and is very traceable, so it's much easier to clamp down on corruption. Thank you very much.
Very, very true. Very true. Thank you very much. Well, of course, we know that, I mean, in parentheses, if one can write an algorithm to collect tax, one can write an algorithm to avoid tax. And so the question of motivation to be in the open is actually quite serious. And unless people see the benefits, it's not going to happen. Any other questions this evening? Or always being said and done? There's a lady over there.
Hello, my name is Anna Maria Apata. I'm born here in Austria. I have also roots in Nigeria. And I'm a bachelor student. And I have a few remarks or questions maybe I can raise. I don't really have solutions. I'm not studying law at the moment. I'm studying economics. And so the first thing the whole discussion is based on the assumption that we're really moving into a digital world where robots are going to replace work. And as I actually find it much more likely is that we will have a gap, and this gap is continuing to broaden between the industrialized world and the developing world. Because if we look back in history, in economic history, how has it come that we here have digitalized and replaced manual labor more with machines and robots, and in developing worlds less so? It's because we here wanted to replace the labor that cost a lot of money. And the question is, like, when people in countries like Nigeria, I mean, Nigeria, for example, it has 95% of internet access, for example. If in countries like that, people are not even earning so much, then there isn't this big incentive to replace their work with machines. And so if you want to reduce charge taxes from people who are barely having something to live from and would anyways be exempt and would anyways still be worth it for companies to use their labor as it is, then how do we go from there? And how do we, in this world, we want to go straight to taxation without giving them labor that pays them more. So that's my question. How do we create jobs and that pays better in countries like Africa?
This is actually a profoundly important question. Are we risking to see an increase in the divide between more advanced economies and developing economies? And it is not necessarily categorically the case, because what we see is many examples of genuine leapfrogging that happens in the developing world. Just take cell phones. the developing countries, by and large, avoided putting telephone posts and landlines. They went straight to cellular phones. What, however, is critical for countries to succeed, not to be left behind, but to leapfrog, is, frankly speaking, institutions and rule of law. You don't have it, very unlikely that you would make big strides. The Rwanda example is because of institutions and rule of law. I'll tell you a little anecdote. It was my first time in Rwanda just a month ago. And you know how there is this first impression that you would remember forever? In my case, it was sitting in the car from the airport, looking out of the window and noticing that every single motorcyclist had a helmet. In other words, people respect the law, 100%. Usually when you go in a developing country, there would be two people, maybe with one or two kids, none of them with helmet. Very often you see this picture. And you go in Rwanda and everybody has a helmet. And then, you know, the rules of the road and the rules of the economy and taxation are being respected. That I cannot stress enough how critical it is for Nigeria or any other country. If you are to benefit from the digital economy, it has to be combined with institutions and respect for the rule of law. And you would ask, how do you do that in a short period of time? It is not easy. And the one ingredient that is irreplaceable, nobody can bring it from outside, is the political will to pursue it. And in the end, for everybody, generating political will is a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a bit of chance, a bit of pressure and demand from the public. But it is absolutely a must. What we can do from the bank is to provide the objective analysis of what would make it or break it for countries. We just did a future drivers of growth study for Rwanda. We have done it for and with, actually not for, but with Rwanda and with China and with Vietnam. We are very keen to help countries see their pathway and what are the opportunities and obstacles on that pathway. But in the end, it is for the country to do it. We have a great saying in Bulgaria: you can take a horse to water, cannot make the horse drink. And that, you know, drinking is absolutely essential, you know, the desire to do so. Okay, I think we are about to exhaust I
think we could have a lot more questions, but I know you have to get away. So I think, thank you very much. You've set us a very interesting agenda, yeah? To me, the theme that runs through this debate was how do we minimize the risks that are attached to digitalization, new technologies, and maximize the benefits? And it touches on a lot of things that are at the core of the bank, dealing with informality, dealing with corruption, meeting the DMR, the SDR goals, looking at inequality, because it is a real risk that these technologies are going to increase inequality. Well, maybe we can switch that around. Think of all those people that live in Africa that have bank accounts offshore, yeah? Blockchain can help you identify them, yeah? So that's, but the key to get the benefits is working together. And I think a business has to have an unprecedented cooperation with government. We have the technicians here. They all have to come together.
And I profoundly apologize. There was a question on whether companies like Google are participating. I didn't answer, and the answer is yes. In Moonshot Africa, Google, Airborne, a number of high-tech, Facebook, they are all partners, because we do need the balloons. I mean, we need all the experimentation that can make rural Africa part of the digital age. And I apologize. You asked this, right? Yeah. Essential, essential. In your summing, you just reminded me, this is absolutely essential. We have to do this together.
Together, and because, you know, we tax people, maybe we know the technologies of today, we don't know what's coming up tomorrow, yeah? Google's and Amazon, they do. So working together. That's been really, I think, it's a fascinating session. Vienna looks very much forward to working with you as you move. I hope the bank can actually, really make this a central theme of the next few years. You have a real role to play, both in ensuring that the voice of developing countries are heard in the international debate, yeah? Any solution, it can't just be work for OECD countries or EU countries, it has to work for the developing countries. And also helping them, in a sense, see that they can use these technologies to completely transform the way their tax systems operate. Because they don't have the legacy issue. I'll give you one country that's backward here, the United States. Why? Because it's so big. No, Wally, it's so big and it's got the old technology and it's too expensive to change. Yeah? It's a legacy issue. A lot of African countries don't have that.
Exactly, that's the leapfrogging.
This
is the leapfrogging opportunity they have.
So we must leapfrog then to, I like that, the African moonshot, yes? So Professor Lang, I think, who heads up the institute is here. So that's the next research topic for us, yes? What would tax systems look like under a program of African moonshot, yes? But thank you very much indeed. Thank you, the audience.
Thank you all very much.